Do I have a superpower? Or do I actually even know how to use it? The question that arises in my mind thinking about day to day life is how often am I comfortable raising a question to authorities? Am I feeling reluctant to question people in power? That power could be at my work, in my family, in a mosque, or even among my friends. The game of power is what really determines how much we believe, what we believe, and how much are we allowed to reason at the end of the day. How often do we feel free to bring in rationale, to bring in understanding, to bring in reasoning, to question authority, especially in our circles, in our societies that are based on religion? Be it at home, be it in a mosque, be it in any cultural center, or a gathering, for instance. Growing up, this was something that I always found difficult, to question the rationale behind rulings on many things, that govern my life. For example, eating, drinking, going out. What do I do on weekends? What do I do in my free time, for instance? And I think this is one of the characteristics that I felt that was quite obvious in many Islamic societies and in Islamic cultures, and perhaps there are many of you that can synchronize with me on this. And at this point, moving further, where we will talk about the purpose of this episode and this entire channel, I'm reminded of the ayah from Surah Al-Baqarah number 30, where we are informed that angels questioned Allah at the time when He was going to create us. And they asked Him, why would you place someone on earth who's going to cause corruption, shed blood, while we are here declaring your greatness, praise, and sanctification? Now, what was the answer to that question is completely outside the scope of this episode, but if you listen to my podcast, there is enough talk on that. What I want to allude here is a long forgotten practice that was celebrated in Islamic cultures was the art of seeking knowledge and understanding, be it in the realm of science or religion, actually. And religion or science was never a part of our history. It was mostly and. And if the angels could ask Allah without being reprimanded, without being told like, who the hell are you, or what do you think you are, or how dare you ask me that question, or simply just shutting the question down, Allah actually responds to that question. And before moving further, in another ayah from the Quran, Allah mentions, indeed the worst of living creatures in the sight of Allah are the deaf and dumb who do not use reason. Now, how much more explicit can it get that we as Muslims, that is part of our heritage, it is part of our culture, governed by Allah Himself, that we must use reasoning and critical thinking to arrive at any conclusion, regardless of the topic. And that is all centered also around verifying our resources of information, as pointed out in Surah 49, ayah number 6. But now that's the Islamic perspective on reasoning. There's also a TED talk given by Samantha Agus where she talks about critical thinking. That is something that is devoid of bias, manipulative techniques, and it is not entirely based on an emotion, rather on a more sound, thought-through and rational approach. For that, she has a 5-step process where she talks about formulating a question, the first one. What is it that I'm looking for? What is the information that I'm looking for at the end? Second step, gather your information. Know your sources, see where you're gathering information from. Third, apply the information, enjoy the fruits and benefits of that. Fourth, consider the implication. Be mindful of what repercussions your conclusions are going to have. See whatever you're going to speak and believe in, what it manifests into. Fifth, explore other viewpoints. This is the only way we can avoid biases and confirmation bias. We should also know why we disagree with something. Here, personally, I would add that agreeing with something does not necessarily mean that all counter-arguments are automatically invalid. And that's where you have this gray area. But to have the gray area, you need to know the blacks and the whites. And that's why my 6th point would be, am I seeking information to validate and verify my preconceived notion? Or am I actually open to give a certain amount of power to the source of information that I'm looking at? As much as simplified it might sound, at the end of the day, it's all about power dynamics, right? Who do we give the power to? Who gives us this ability to mold our perceptions, ideas, opinions, and the entire perception that we have? Needless to say, actually, we literally work on power. I mean, look at it. Our bodies, for example, we need food to burn, and whatever we consume is basically that. And same goes for every living object, photosynthesis and whatnot. Therefore, we need to know who eventually gets the power to rule us. Is it ourselves, our egoistic selves, or our higher selves? We were not born with knowledge except what our intuition taught us, right? Everything else is more or less the result of the powers or distributed everywhere in the world. Watching some talk shows, for example, from John Oliver, you would also, you can simply just go on YouTube and enjoy that. We will also come to understand that it is quite ubiquitous that plenty of research institutes and their scientists are funded by powerful families and companies. Therefore, we cannot simply and solely rely on science for every single thing out there, especially when it comes to unseen experiences of a human. And because at the end of the day, if something is run by a certain amount of power, we could question the scope of transparency. I don't want to invalidate science at all. This was not the intention. What I'm here to question is the source of the scope of transparency that it gives us. So when we're talking about reasoning, we also have to look at the mind, right? So what does the mind do? We understand, we judge, and we reason. We use these faculties of 5 senses to determine and understand what do we have in front of us. This helps us to create a reality that we live in and with that understanding, we are able to judge what do we do with this information and consequently reason with it. This is where our superpower comes in, and the pivotal question arises: do I have the right information, a set of tools to understand, judge, and reason? And therefore, without our talk would be incomplete if we do not refer to logic. Now, how often have we studied logic, right? I mean, if we look at the engineering sciences and medicine and whatnot, I don't remember in my engineering sciences that I was taught about logic. So here I am talking about it, and let's dig into it. So logic, for instance, it encompasses reasoning, discourse, and language. I'm not going to get into the details of that. However, I would highly invite my audience to research more about it, especially the session given by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf on logic. It's not a very religious talk, but he gives very important information on that. Therefore, he points out on 3 things what logic entails: concepts, judgments, and benefit. At the heart of concept lies definition. I mean, example of a glass, right? Even if the glass is said in different languages differently, we all are trying to explain the same concept because we know what that it is, and we have a different word for it. And for every concept we establish, we assert one and negate the other, and that is a universal principle. Because quite often I'm told that, I don't like that each religion thinks that they are right, but basically for us to believe in something, for us to establish something, for us to assert something, we have to negate the anti of it. So for example, if an electron has a negative charge, we cannot say that it might have a positive charge as well. If electron only has a negative charge. Therefore, negation and assertion is part of it. Additionally, we take observation and intuition into account, because intuition substantially influences our reality. And for example, even if we know that the New Year's is basically the Earth completing its rotation around the sun, and we don't do that. Hey, let's go out tonight and we celebrate. We celebrate that the Earth just went around the sun. It just completed the rotation. We say that the sun is rising, the sun is setting. We say that Happy New Year's Eve, and this is how we are programmed. We have a certain intuition within us. Therefore, I would argue not any Tom, Dick, and Harry can simply stand up and challenge a definition. Language is a science that has its roots outside randomness, and it is crucial that experts of linguistics get a say in it, to get a say how we define and redefine stuff, grammar for instance. And we live in times where we have a very poor grammar. The reasons for that, again, it's out of the scope of this episode, but we sometimes also need to check ourselves that the language we all speak, communicating, is mostly not our mother tongue that we talk in, especially with our friends, and the media that we consume. And because that's why if everything is up for redefining, then there is no such a reality anymore. Therefore, it's important to talk about axioms of logic, which are as follows. For example, A is not A, and then you have law of non-contradiction, where you have something cannot be and be at the same time, which basically talks about A is not A. Then you have law of excluded middle, where you have it's either A or not A. And then you have the law of inclusive middle. This is where you have a bit of this Buddhist concept that something can be something and not be at the same time, and that's where quantum mechanics comes in. And that's why I'm going to give an example from our reality, and because religions do talk about it. And now, if you look into the realm of quantum mechanics, you would come to realize that They have what was it? Yes, they have light, for example. Light is a particle and line at the same time. And then this is also something that some Islamic scholars even argue, that there must be a coexistence of spirituality with materialism, because for us to have an experience of only oneness of something, that does not mean that we are going to be good humans, right? And what makes a good human is another episode that I have planned in this series. Therefore, understanding all of how all these things come together, the logic, the mind, the reasoning, and whatnot, it's important to talk about determinism and destiny, because I would only like to for now highlight and explore this, and I will definitely explore this topic more as we move further in this series, that as much as we like to believe that we are free creatures, in fact much of what we do, what we believe, what we say is not really our freedom. And of course, also, one can argue, if everything is destined, why am I doing anything? And this is a solid philosophical question. However, within the Islamic domain, we are required to celebrate our freedom of choice, and that we are taught to demonstrate by taking responsibility in our action, in our words, and realizing that we will be held accountable for whatever we do, for whatever we say at one point in time. And then we find peace in events that are taking place around us, on which we have no control over, and knowing that they are being taken care by the most compassionate, most knowledgeable, absolute wise and merciful God, that is Allah. In order to proceed with this series, these topics and what is coming ahead, we all of what we talked about so far will serve as a groundworks for something bigger that's coming forward, especially related to sexuality, gender, and so on. And I personally believe that no social topic must be addressed without attending to these realities as well. Allah says in the Quran in Surah 86, Ayah 5, so let humans consider from what were they created. So even if, usually atheists, they bring Darwin into play when we talk about theory of evolution and whatnot. Darwin himself was actually a believer in God, and for that you don't have to, just Google his book that he wrote, the first book that he wrote on evolution. The last page talks about the existence of God. So just because I'm believing in God does not mean I have to refute science completely. However, when something comes in direct clash with what Allah has said, that is where we accept our limitations of intellect and logic, because we know we have limitations. We know we have our biases and whatnot. But then at the end of the day, where do we draw the line, and who tells us to draw the line? And as much as we love to break our limits, we also must know where our limits are. And as the saying goes, humans selves and egos are by nature corruptible. And this is where I would like to end by saying that we need to understand our limitations. We need to celebrate our freedom. We need to celebrate our thoughts, everything that we have inside in our heads, and also find a way that it's never either or when it comes to, because we cannot simply ignore the scientific realities around us, and then at the same time, there's a lot happening in the unseen world that affects our seen world, that affects how we think, that affects what we do at the end of the day. And before jumping directly to the topic, because the entire goal of my channel is to give this space where people who are so busy with their topics of within religion and within science, so many people who are struggling with their desires, especially nowadays where we live, where we have this open LGBTQIA plus culture, and there are so many religious societies finding it difficult to come in terms with that. We cannot ignore the fact that atheism is not that old. You have civilizations of more than 5,000 years where people really identify themselves with the religion. So I don't know how long will it take for the entire world to be atheist, if or not, or I'm not saying that the world should be atheist. What I'm saying is that there are more atheists now. There are more people moving away from religion, and in this transition time, I hope to bring a dialogue. I hope to bring discourse where people can question what religions actually have to say. How do I implement what Quran told me 1400 years ago? How can I understand the word of Allah without bending it to my liking? What do I do with with the events that are not in my control? And what do I do with the desires that I have, right? I mean, if I'm gay, or if I'm a lesbian, or whatever, if I have difficulties understanding the gender that I am in and what my society expects from me, how far can I go in exploring that? And is there no end to it? Is there an end to it? So these are the questions that we are going to look at. And for all of that, we first need to look at few things. We need to look at epistemology. We need to look at our power to reason, the logic and whatnot. So this is what we're going to explore in the next episodes. And I really hope that my channel, Bridging Realities, actually gives us an insight into the diversified realities that we have around us, and that we can all come together peacefully, respectfully discuss and respectfully disagree and respectfully go back to our homes without canceling without one canceling the other out. Thank you so much for joining in. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment, and I will see you next time.